Before this story continues, please allow me to be clear about one thing. The story you are about to hear is a work of fiction created for entertainment and educational purposes. It reflects patterns of toxic family dynamics and the inner journey of a woman who endured silence for far too long. All characters, events, and circumstances are entirely fictional and do not represent real people or real situations. Some elements may have been assisted by AI during the creative and production process. This story does not promote violence, hatred, or harm of any kind. It is told to invite empathy, reflection, and personal growth, especially for women who have sacrificed, endured, and been wounded within their own families. The entire narrative is designed to be advertiser-friendly and aligned with YouTube community guidelines, and it does not intend to defame, imply, or attack any real individual. If you recognize a piece of your own life in this story, please stay until the end. And if something in your heart is stirred, share your thoughts in the comments, or follow the channel to continue with stories for women who have carried quiet burdens and still deserve understanding and respect. My name is Maris. I am 26 years old and I work as a property valuation assistant. I do not talk much. I watch numbers paper and timing. I live in Plano, Texas, in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. In March of 2024, I sat at a small notary office inside a strip mall between a nail salon and a sandwich shop. The TV on the wall played the weather. The printer made a tired, clicking sound. The room smelled faintly of sugar from a box of donuts my mother brought, as if it were a celebration. Across the table sat my mother, Susan, 52 years old, with a voice that stayed sweet even when it cut. Beside her sat my stepfather, Dr. Leonard Hale, 58, a medical millionaire known in our town as a deaf hero. He built clinics, sponsored charity runs, and stood smiling in local brochures with my mother translating his silence into devotion. The notary, Mr. Cardenas, in his 40s, was neutral, professional, and tired in the way people get when paperwork matters more than feelings. I placed my hands flat on the table and waited. I had learned to wait. The notary cleared his throat and asked a question so ordinary it should not have mattered. "Do we need an interpreter today?" Leonard answered in a clear, steady voice. "No, we are good." The room did not explode. No one gasped. The printer jammed. The TV droned on about rain. My mother looked at me before she looked at anyone else. In that look, I understood everything. This was not a mistake. This was permission. I did not feel shocked in the way movies teach you. I felt compressed like air forced out of a room. I had known for years that something did not line up. Leonard never needed help ordering coffee or calling a car. He laughed at the right moments even when my mother was not translating. He knew when conversations turned and when money changed hands. But knowledge without proof is a trap. Silence is safer than being told you are difficult. I had learned that lesson early. The notary asked us to proceed. Papers slid toward me. My name appeared where it always had, and then where it would not appear again. My mother spoke softly about keeping things simple, about protecting a man with a disability, about not embarrassing family. Leonard did not sign. He listened. I signed. The pen felt heavier than it should. That was the moment I paid the price in public. I want you to understand why I am telling this. I am not here to shame anyone online. I am not here to perform outrage. I am here because people lose their lives quietly through paperwork and smiles and the phrase for the family. I am here to show how that happens and how it ends without shouting. What follows is not about revenge that burns hot. It is about justice that moves cold and slow and cannot be reversed once it starts. If you have ever been asked to stay quiet, to keep the peace, stay with me until the end. It matters. Leonard Hale did not become a respected figure in our town by accident. His image was built carefully over years until it hardened into something people no longer questioned. In Plano, everyone knew his name. He appeared on brochures from the local hospital, smiling gently beside phrases about resilience and courage. He showed up at charity runs wearing a t-shirt with the name of a foundation stitched across his chest, while my mother jogged beside him, clapping so people would notice him. At church events, he sat in the front row, while pastors paused respectfully and waited for Susan to translate his silence into gratitude. There were small newspaper articles too, the kind people skim while drinking coffee, articles about a successful doctor who lost his hearing and turned adversity into service. My mother kept those clippings in a neat folder at home, as if they were family photos. When people praised Leonard for being brave, Susan smiled with the practiced humility of a woman who had learned how admiration works. She would touch his arm lightly and translate words he had not signed yet, as if anticipating him. It made her look devoted and made him look fragile in a way that earned protection. I watched this routine repeat for years. Leonard rarely needed an interpreter when it mattered. He ordered food at restaurants without waiting for Susan to translate. He booked cars and flights easily. He spoke privately with his accountant in low tones when he thought no one noticed. When waiters asked if he needed anything special, he waved them off with a smile that said, "I have this handled." In public spaces where sympathy mattered, he leaned into silence. In spaces where control mattered, he never seemed lost. I noticed all of it. I said none of it. Silence was how I stayed in the room. I was not Susan's favorite person. I never had been. I was not difficult or rebellious. I simply did not fit the image she wanted reflected back at her. I worked with numbers and documents. I asked questions when something felt unclear. Susan called that sensitivity. She called it overthinking. In front of Leonard, she spoke about me with a tone that sounded caring but always landed sharp. She would say Maris worries too much or Maris reads into things. Then she would smile at Leonard and translate something entirely different, praising his patience or thanking him for understanding. Leonard nodded as if absorbing her words while his eyes stayed on me, measuring something I could not name. At family dinners, Susan made a show of praising Leonard for everything, for providing the house, for handling money, for carrying the weight of responsibility even with his disability. She said these things loudly enough for me to hear, and then turned to me with a softer voice telling me I was lucky to live under this roof. The implication was clear. I existed on his generosity. When I mentioned work or deadlines, she laughed lightly and said, "Of course you would think like that. You work in paperwork, you see problems everywhere." She said it like a joke. Leonard smiled. The table laughed. I learned the rhythm. Praise him, diminish me. Call it family humor. That was the first level of escalation, gratitude. I was told again and again that I should be grateful. Grateful Leonard paid the mortgage. Grateful he supported the household. Grateful he let me stay while I figured myself out. It was always framed as kindness. "You should be thankful," Susan said one night as she cleared plates. "Not everyone would take care of family like Leonard does." She translated something to him that made him nod solemnly. I did not hear what she said. I did not need to. The second level came when gratitude turned into moral pressure. Susan began using Leonard's supposed disability as a shield. When I hesitated about a decision or asked for clarification, she leaned in and lowered her voice. "Don't embarrass him," she said. "You know how people look at a man like that." Her eyes flicked toward Leonard and back to me. "Don't make him uncomfortable. Don't make a scene." The room would go quiet just enough to make me feel exposed. Leonard sat there silent, letting the weight fall on me. If I spoke, I was not just difficult, I was cruel. I was the one hurting a man who had already suffered enough. That framing worked on everyone, friends, relatives, even me. I swallowed questions because they felt dangerous. The third level came when pressure hardened into threat. It did not arrive loudly. It arrived with paperwork and calm voices. Susan started asking for my help with documents. "Just look these over," she said. "You are good with this stuff." It started small. Dates, addresses, simple confirmations. Then it shifted. She asked me to sign things without explaining why. She told me it was temporary. She said it simplified things. When I asked what exactly I was signing, she sighed and said, "You always need every detail." She smiled when she said it. Leonard watched. One evening, she set a stack of papers on the table and told me we needed to finalize some family matters. I skimmed the pages and saw my name removed from a section that mattered. When I hesitated, Susan leaned closer and dropped her voice. If you do not sign, she said you will be the one tearing this family apart. The words sat heavy in the air. Leonard did not react. He did not need to. The accusation did the work. I signed that night. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself peace mattered. Later that week, we sat down to dinner. Susan served Leonard first, and then turned to me. Leonard moved his lips slightly but did not lift his hands. Susan translated immediately without waiting. She spoke smoothly as if reciting a line she had memorized. She laughed at the right moment. Leonard smiled. I realized then that he had not signed anything. He had not gestured. He had not needed to. Susan had managed the room so well she no longer needed cues. I looked down at my plate and felt something settle inside me. It was not anger yet. It was clarity. My mom did not lie. She just managed the room. If you have ever had someone in your family tell you not to make things difficult so everyone else can stay comfortable, comment one word, yes. After that dinner, I stopped believing things would stay the same. The pressure did not arrive all at once. It came the way family pressure usually does, quietly dressed as help. Susan began asking me to handle paperwork for the family more often. She framed it as a favor because of my job and because she trusted me. Just take a look, she would say, sliding a folder across the table. You are good with these things. I asked what the documents were for, and she waved a hand as if brushing away dust. Just simplifying, she said. It is nothing serious. Leonard sat nearby reading his phone or staring out the window. He never interrupted. He never signed. He listened. The first few times I reviewed the papers carefully and returned them unsigned with notes asking for clarification. Susan smiled tightly and said we would get to it later. Later turned into pressure. She asked again, and this time said it was temporary. Just until things are organized, she explained. It will all go back the way it was. I noticed my name being removed from small sections that did not look important on the surface. A beneficiary line here, an ownership reference there. It was subtle enough that someone not trained to read documents might miss it. When I pointed this out, Susan sighed and said, You always see the worst. You work with paperwork all day, so you imagine problems where there are none. Leonard nodded at the sound of her voice. I signed one document that week, telling myself it was a concession, not a loss. Then another. The next shift was more direct. Susan asked me to meet her at the kitchen table with a stack of papers already prepared. This time she did not pretend it was optional. We need to finalize this, she said. It will make things easier for everyone. I flipped through the pages and saw a clearer change. My name was removed as a beneficiary from a rental property the family owned near a small lake. It was not a mansion. It was a modest cabin used for weekends and occasional rental income. It had always been described as something that would eventually pass to me. When I asked about it, Susan did not explain. She leaned back and smiled thinly. You do not really have anything to lose, she said. It is not like you rely on that place. Leonard shifted his gaze toward me. He did not look confused. He looked patient. The implication was that I was making this harder than it needed to be. Over the following months, the language sharpened. Susan reminded me that I lived under Leonard's roof. She said it casually while pouring coffee or folding laundry. You live here, she would say, as if stating the weather. You are supported here. She followed it with smaller cuts. You do not have a husband, so you would not understand. She said it as if it were advice. Once she laughed and added women should not be so rigid. That kind of stiffness makes life difficult. Leonard smiled at that and reached for his glass. I noticed that my access to money tightened quietly. I was not asked if I needed anything. Expenses I once shared were suddenly covered only by Leonard and Susan. When I paid my own bills, no one commented. When I did not ask for help, no one offered. The message was clear. Dependence was expected, gratitude was required, silence was rewarded. I adjusted. I did not argue. I stopped asking. I paid what I could. I watched, I saved, I documented. I kept copies of everything, emails, scans, dates, versions. I built timelines the way some people build scrapbooks, not for nostalgia, but for survival. Susan did not know this. Leonard might have suspected, but he never said anything. During this time, I received a call that Susan did not hear. It came late in the afternoon while I was reviewing property valuations for work. The voice on the other end belonged to someone senior in my industry, someone I had met briefly during a training session months earlier. The conversation was short and professional. I mentioned a discrepancy I had noticed in a set of records unrelated to my family. There was a pause, and then the person said, "Just flag it. If it is off, it is off." That was all. No promises, no drama. Just a reminder that systems exist for a reason. After the call, I created a folder on my laptop and named it Hale Property History. I did not tell anyone. I did not open it every day. I added to it slowly. The pressure at home increased as if Susan sensed time tightening. She brought out a thick packet one evening and set it down in front of me. "We need to keep things calm," she said. "This will keep things calm." Leonard sat across from me. He looked directly at my face. He did not sign. He did not need to. Susan pointed to the signature lines. "Just sign, and we can all move on," she said. I flipped through the packet carefully. It was larger than before, more comprehensive, more permanent. My name disappeared from several places at once. I felt my chest tighten, but my hand stayed steady. I looked up, and Susan met my eyes. "If you do not sign," she said quietly, "you will be the one causing problems. You will be the one tearing this family apart." Leonard watched. I signed, but this time I noted the date and time. I took photos of the cover page and the signature page. I saved copies. I did not argue. I documented. If you have ever signed something you are not allowed to understand, do not feel ashamed. Stay with me. The truth did not arrive with a confession or a dramatic slip. It arrived the way most real truths do, through paperwork that was not meant to tell a story at all. At work, I was reviewing a set of valuation files tied to a medical-related benefit connected to a property trust. It was routine, dry, numbers aligned, dates matched. Then a line appeared that did not belong to the narrative I had been living in. Patient responded verbally. It sat there without emphasis. No bold text, no warning, just a note buried in a billing record attached to a prior year. I scrolled back and forward expecting it to be a mistake. It was not. The same line appeared again in another year, then another, different providers, same wording. Patient responded verbally. I did not feel shocked in a cinematic way. There was no rush of blood or racing heart. What I felt was cold, spreading slowly through my back as patterns formed. Paperwork does not do drama, it does patterns. I pulled additional files connected to the same trust and benefit. More notes, more years, always the same phrase, always mundane, always consistent. Leonard Hale had responded verbally for years, while the world applauded his silence. I closed the file and stared at my screen. Images replayed quietly. Leonard ordering food without waiting. Leonard laughing at jokes before Susan translated. Leonard speaking with his accountant behind a closed door. Moments I had cataloged but dismissed because naming them felt dangerous. I blamed myself next. I wondered why I had not pushed harder, why I had swallowed doubt instead of voicing it. Then another thought followed just as calmly. Silence was how I survived. In that house, questions were treated like offenses. Proof was treated like betrayal. I had learned early that observation kept me safe. I saved copies of the records and added them to the folder on my laptop. Hale Property History grew heavier. At home, the pressure shifted as if Susan sensed movement she could not see. She began speaking faster and with less patience. One morning she told me we needed to go to the notary next week. She said it casually while buttering toast. When I asked why she did not answer directly, she smiled and said, "You always need evidence. Living like that must be exhausting." Leonard sat at the table pretending to read his phone. When a neighbor stopped by later that afternoon, Leonard lifted his hands and signed a greeting. Susan translated immediately. His gestures were sloppy and unnecessary. Watching it made my stomach turn. The performance felt louder now that I knew. Susan watched me closely whenever Leonard signed in public. It was not fear in her eyes, it was calculation. She scheduled appointments at times when other people would be present. She chose offices with waiting rooms and neutral witnesses. I began to understand the design. Public spaces kept me contained. They kept me from reacting. They turned silence into compliance. Each time she mentioned the notary, she framed it as a favor, just to finalize things, just to keep everything smooth. Leonard never contradicted her. He let her speak for him. He let her manage the room. At night, I replayed conversations in my head. I saw the moments where Susan looked at me before translating. I saw how Leonard waited for her cues. The realization settled with weight, but also with clarity. My mother knew. She had always known. She had built the timing around that knowledge. The thought hurt less than it should have. It explained too much. When Susan pressed harder, I stopped asking questions. I did not confront them. I prepared. I reviewed my files. I organized timelines. I noted dates and locations of every document I had signed. I matched them against the records from work. The connections were not emotional. They were logistical. Susan announced the notary appointment again over dinner, as if it were inevitable. Leonard nodded. Susan added that it was better to do these things in front of professionals. She said it protected everyone. I understood what she meant. It protected them from me. The night before the appointment, I felt tired rather than afraid. The pressure had reached its breaking point, not because it was loud, but because it was precise. Susan had narrowed my options until compliance felt like the only path. She had counted on my silence. She had counted on witnesses. She had counted on the story holding. She did not know that paperwork remembers even when people pretend not to. If you have ever felt that the most painful thing was not what was said, but what was deliberately left unsaid, you are not alone. The notary office sat between a nail salon and a sandwich shop in a strip mall off a 6-lane road in Plano, Texas, and everything about it felt aggressively ordinary. The glass door had fingerprints at eye level. A small television mounted too high on the wall looped the local weather forecast with the volume barely audible. A stack of paper cups sat next to a water dispenser that tasted faintly of plastic. Mr. Cardenas greeted us with the same neutral smile he gave everyone who walked in and asked us to take a seat. Susan placed a white box of donuts on the corner of his desk like a peace offering, and said she brought something sweet because it was a long morning. Leonard nodded and smiled at Mr. Cardenas. There was no hesitation in his expression, no confusion, no need for translation. Mr. Cardenas opened the file and began reading the standard language in a tone that suggested he had done this 1,000 times already. Names, dates, property description, rights and acknowledgments. He looked up and asked a routine question as if it meant nothing at all. "Do we need an interpreter today?" Leonard answered in a normal voice without thinking. "No, we are good." The room did not explode. No one gasped. The television kept talking about rain later in the afternoon. The printer behind Mr. Cardenas clicked and whirred. Mr. Cardenas paused for 1 second. Not long enough to make a scene, just long enough to register that something had shifted. He glanced at Susan and then at me. Susan did not react the way a wife protecting a deaf husband would. She did not correct him. She did not look surprised. She simply smiled and said, "We are all set." In that moment, the exposure was complete. It was not dramatic, it was public. Leonard had spoken, everyone had heard it. And then Susan moved. She leaned slightly toward me and lowered her voice as if the danger was not the lie but the attention. She said, "Let us just sign and be done." She said, "Do not make this bigger than it needs to be." She said, "Think about how this looks." Leonard sat back in his chair and watched me. He did not sign. He waited. Mr. Cardenas slid the papers toward me and pointed to the highlighted section. This amendment removed my name from a portion of the beneficiary structure tied to a rental property that had always been described to me as temporary and symbolic. Susan spoke again before I could ask a question. She said it was just paperwork. She said I had nothing to lose. She said if I made noise about this, I would be the person attacking a disabled man in public. The words landed like a threat wrapped in concern. I looked around the room. The receptionist at the front desk typed without looking up. A couple waited near the door whispering to each other. No one was on my side because no one knew there was a side to take. Mr. Cardenas cleared his throat and said gently that we could take a moment if needed. Susan smiled at him and said we were fine. Leonard did not look at me. He looked at the paper. He looked comfortable. I realized then that this was the price. It was not just the asset or the name removed from a document. It was being forced to participate in my own erasure while strangers watched. Susan repeated herself more firmly. Sign it and we can all move on. She said keeping the peace mattered more than my feelings. She said families do not need drama. The implication was clear. Silence was loyalty. Compliance was kindness. I picked up the pen. My hand did not shake. I signed where indicated. Mr. Cardenas notarized the page and stamped it with a dull thud that sounded louder than it should have. Leonard finally signed after me. Susan thanked Mr. Cardenas and offered him a donut. He declined politely. As we stood to leave, I felt lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter because the worst had already happened. Heavier because it had happened in front of witnesses who would never know what it cost. I did not cry, I did not argue, I did not explain. One thought settled clearly in my mind as we walked back into the bright parking lot. When people tell you to keep the peace, what they mean is, keep your place. If you want to know how I answered that moment without raising my voice or breaking the rules, stay with me, because what came next did not require noise at all. After the notary office, there was no dramatic fallout, no shouting, no messages demanding explanations. That was what made it unsettling. The silence felt intentional. I went back to my apartment and placed the signed copy in a folder the same way I did with everything else. I did not post anything. I did not call anyone to warn them. I did not hint online or reach out to friends. I knew the kind of justice that mattered to people who had lived long enough to be disappointed by noise. It was the kind that held up when no one was watching. I started by doing what I had always done quietly. I organized. I built a timeline, dates of public appearances, copies of brochures, screenshots of event schedules, records that showed when Leonard was described as deaf in one context and responsive in another. I added the notarized document and the earlier versions that still carried my name. I included notes from my own work files where patterns mattered more than opinions. I did not editorialize. I let the paper speak. When the packet was complete, it was not thick. It was precise. I sent it to the board of the charity Leonard had built his reputation around. I sent it to a financial management partner whose name appeared repeatedly in public filings. I sent it to a compliance office whose job was not to punish but to ask uncomfortable questions. I did not accuse. I used neutral language. Possible misrepresentation affecting funds, tax, or benefit. Request for review. I knew those words carried weight because they were boring. While I waited, I went to work. I paid my bills. I did not answer Susan when she texted asking if I was upset. I let the system move at its own pace because systems do not respond to emotion. They respond to consistency. About a week later, I received a call from a number I recognized but had never expected to see on my phone. The voice on the other end was calm and uncurious. He said he had received my materials. He said they were clear. He said I had done the right thing. Then he said something that changed how I saw myself in this story. He said, "Now let the system do its job." That was when the breadcrumb I had been carrying quietly finally mattered. I was not just an assistant who handled forms. I was someone who had trained to see how data lined up across departments. Someone who had interned in spaces where accuracy was not optional. I had never advertised that part of my life because I had never needed to. Susan and Leonard had mistaken my quiet for ignorance. They had mistaken my lack of performance for a lack of reach. The consequences began small. Leonard disappeared from the charity website. The bio page vanished first, then the photos. An upcoming event was postponed pending review. A sponsor issued a vague statement about reassessing partnerships. No one accused him publicly. No one needed to. The absence did the work. Susan called me twice in one day. Her voice was tight. She did not ask how I was. She asked if I had heard anything. She asked if I knew what people were saying. When I did not respond, she sent another message asking if I had told anyone. That was the part that revealed everything. Her concern was not whether the truth had hurt me, it was whether the truth had reached others. Leonard stopped attending public events. The church bulletin listed him as unavailable. A local paper ran a short update about organizational changes without naming names. The system moved quietly but decisively. I watched from a distance as the story rewrote itself without my participation. There was no moment where I stood up and declared victory. There was no scene where Susan apologized. Instead, there was a gradual shift in how people treated them. Invitations dried up, calls went unanswered. The reputation they had built on careful performance began to feel fragile. Susan finally came to see me in person. She stood in my doorway and looked around as if measuring the distance between my life and hers. She said we did not think it would go this far. I told her I had not thought about how far it would go at all. She said Leonard had reasons. She said families protect their own. I asked her one question, and then I stopped. I asked when had she planned to protect me. She did not answer. She asked if I could help fix it. She asked if I could talk to someone. She asked if I could sign something else. That was the audacity. The assumption that my role was still to clean up what they broke. I told her no. I told her I was done signing things I was not allowed to understand. I told her that whatever happened next was between Leonard and the truth. She left without raising her voice. The fallout continued without me. Sponsors withdrew quietly. Reviews continued. Leonard was not charged with anything dramatic. He simply lost the shield his image had provided. That was enough. I returned to my routines. I slept better. I stopped flinching when my phone rang. The justice was not loud, but it was irreversible. It did not restore what I had lost in that office, but it returned something else. My sense that silence could be a tool instead of a wound. That was the real revenge. Susan showed up on a quiet Tuesday evening just as the sun dropped behind the neighboring buildings and turned the parking lot a dull orange. She stood in the doorway of my small apartment without asking to come in and let her eyes move across the room the way she always did when she wanted to measure my life against hers. The couch was secondhand. The coffee table had a chipped corner. There were files stacked neatly along one wall and a single plant by the window that I kept alive more out of habit than optimism. She smiled in a careful way and said she had not expected it to be this small. Then she stepped inside anyway. Her opening line came out soft but weighted. We did not think it would go this far. It sounded like concern, but it was really a calculation. She was not asking how I was holding up. She was testing whether the ground beneath her had fully given way. She sat down without waiting for an invitation and folded her hands in her lap as if she were preparing for a negotiation. She said, families make hard choices. She said she had done what she thought was best at the time. She said Leonard had reasons, and that people never understand what it takes to protect a man who has given so much. When I did not respond, she continued. She said I had always been intense. She said I looked for problems where there were none. She said my need for proof made everything heavier than it needed to be. It was the same script delivered with a new urgency. I watched her talk and noticed how she avoided the word lie. She spoke around it like it was a piece of furniture she did not want to bump into. She said the charity work was still important. She said people depended on it. She said the review was causing stress, and that stress was not good for Leonard. Then she leaned forward and lowered her voice. She said there were forms that needed attention. She said signatures could make things easier. She said this was a moment where I could choose to help or choose to hurt. That was when I interrupted her. I did not raise my voice. I did not list evidence. I did not explain timelines or intent. I said one sentence and then I stopped. You knew. That was the whole crime. The room went still. Susan stared at me as if she had not expected the conversation to end so quickly. She asked if I was really going to do this to her. She said mothers make sacrifices. She said I would understand one day. I told her I already did. I told her understanding did not require compliance. She stood up and paced the length of the room as if movement might change my answer. She said Leonard was being treated unfairly. She said the system was cold. She said this could still be fixed if I was willing to step in. She asked if I would at least talk to someone. She asked if I would at least sign a clarification. I told her no. I told her I was done signing things I was not allowed to question. She looked at me then, with something close to anger. She said I was ungrateful. She said everything I had came from that family. I said quietly that everything I had now I had kept by myself. She gathered her purse and moved toward the door but paused as if hoping for a final change of heart. She said I was making a mistake. I said maybe. She left without another word. The consequences did not arrive all at once. They came in practical ways. Susan called less often, and when she did, it was not to check on me but to ask if I had heard updates. Leonard did not reach out at all. Through indirect channels, I learned that the review had expanded. A financial partner requested additional documentation. A sponsor delayed funding. Susan tried again by email and asked if I would reconsider helping clarify things for the sake of the family. I did not respond. That silence felt different from the one I had lived in before. It was chosen. The pressure shifted back where it belonged. Susan had assumed my role was to absorb damage and then assist with repairs. When that option disappeared, she had nothing else to offer. Weeks later, she sent a short message saying she hoped I was happy. I read it once and archived it. There was no satisfaction in watching the fallout, but there was relief in no longer being part of it. I returned to my routines. I went to work. I cooked simple meals. I slept without rehearsing conversations in my head. The boundary held because I did not argue for it. I simply refused to cross it again. If you think about it, that is often how accountability works. People apologize when they want access. They explain when they want relief. When they realize there will be no signature and no silence, the performance stops. If you have ever noticed that pattern and wondered if you were alone, stay with me because the quiet after saying no can be the beginning of something steady and real. Life did not transform into something glossy after the last door closed. It softened instead. My days settled into a rhythm that felt earned rather than promised. I woke on the same worn sofa that had carried me through the worst months and brewed cheap coffee that tasted better once I stopped rushing. I went to work and did my job carefully. I paid my bills on time. I walked the same route in the evenings and noticed small things again, like the way the light fell across the parking lot and the sound of a neighbor practicing piano with the windows open. There was no parade for choosing myself. There was just space. I did not win a fortune. I did not recover what I signed away. What returned was quieter and more useful. I got my mornings back. I got my sleep back. I got the ability to hear my own thoughts without rehearsing defenses. The system kept moving without me. Reviews concluded. Names stayed absent where they used to be celebrated. Invitations never arrived again. The fallout took time and unfolded out of public view, which felt appropriate. I had paid the price where people could see it, and I did not need to watch what followed. Distance became a kind of peace. People sometimes ask if I regret not confronting them more loudly. I think about that and realize regret assumes there was a different version of me who could have done that safely. There was not. The version of me that survived learned to read rooms and protect herself with preparation. That skill did not disappear when the truth surfaced. It finally had a place to rest. I learned that some families do not break you with fists. They do it with paperwork and smiles. They teach you to confuse politeness with love and silence with loyalty. It takes years to untangle that lesson, and it rarely happens in a single brave moment. It happens in small choices that add up. Choosing not to argue, choosing to document, choosing to walk away when the price becomes too high. Respect should not be the price of belonging. If you have to give up your voice to stay connected, the connection is already compromised. Family does not get a discount on honesty. That realization did not make me bitter. It made me precise. I became careful about where I placed my effort and generous only where it was returned. I stopped explaining my boundaries to people who benefited from crossing them. On weekends, I read on the couch with my feet up, and the plant by the window grew new leaves. I saved what I could and planned modestly. I did not need a new story to replace the old one. I needed consistency. There were moments when memories surfaced unexpectedly. The notary office smell of paper and coffee. The way my name disappeared from a line I had trusted. Those moments passed faster than they used to. Pain loses its grip when it is no longer fed by denial. I never reconciled with Susan. We exchanged brief messages on holidays that said nothing and asked for nothing. Leonard remained absent. That absence stopped feeling like a wound and started feeling like information. It told me what I needed to know about the cost of performance and the fragility of reputations built on managed truths. I did not seek forgiveness, and I did not offer it as a currency. I offered myself steadiness instead. Over time, that steadiness became visible to others. Colleagues trusted me with responsibility because I was thorough. Friends relied on me because I listened without needing to fix. I learned that calm is not a personality trait. It is a skill you build when chaos no longer sets the rules. When I look back at the day I signed my name in front of strangers, I do not feel shame. I feel clarity. That was the moment I stopped confusing peace with erasure. I paid the price in public. They paid it slowly in private. The difference matters. It means the cost no longer belongs to me.